Hey guys, do you know someone considering renting their property as an Airbnb? I have worked with Rental Advisor for over a decade, and Rental Advisor provides free rental projections to prospective owners, realtors, and investors for any property in the US. So if you know someone considering getting into the vacation rental industry, have them email management@myrentaladvisor.com to get their free revenue projections. Hey everybody, and welcome to today's episode. Today I am joined by my good friend Jacob Hess. Jacob, how you doing?
Hey Jacob, Jacobs need to stick together, eh?
Exactly. Hey, real quick, could you give everybody just a real brief background on who you are, and that way they know who I'm talking to here?
Well, I'm a writer. That's pretty much the only thing I know what to do. I don't know how to fix things. I don't know how to shoot guns. I just write. But I don't write books anymore because nobody reads books. So I've been kind of doing more journalism things these days with Public Square magazine and Deseret News.
And you largely run at least Public Square magazine. You and some others.
Well, I've shifted energies, doing a lot more with Deseret and other things. And there's an amazing new editor, Danny Frost, at Public Square. I'm still involved and writing and recruiting. So, yeah, it just keeps evolving and expanding. So that's been fun. I'm really interested in liberal conservative dialogue. And so I was thrilled with President Nelson's talk and the peacemaking. And I think that'll be some of the context for our conversation. Obviously, his message can be misunderstood as well, as I know you've spoken to.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so everyone listening, if you haven't checked out Public Square magazine, it's publicsquaremag.org, is it? Is that the web address? Yeah. Go check that out. Honestly, I honestly think it has probably the best faithful Latter-day Saint content out there, as far as like really deeply well thought out commentary on social issues and kind of the ideological forces that are swirling around, and really sharp Latter-day Saints and others commenting on that. So really appreciate what you're doing there. Today, though, we were going to talk a little bit about the about the Faith Matters episode that I put together. You have some involvement with Faith Matters. Tell everybody a little bit about that.
Well, my friend Jay reached out to me years ago, letting me know about this new effort and invited me to some of the early meetings. And I was invited to be on the advisory board at the time, and I've just kind of stayed on. I've gotten to know a lot of them through the process. Probably, maybe 80, 90 hours of conversation with Patrick Mason, Tom Christofferson, Bill Turnbull, and attended several of their retreats. And I think those who know me know that you and me, Jacob, we think a lot the same. Like, we're not that different. So many of the questions you're raising, I've had. So much so that I had a friend reach out to me in shock, like, you're on the Faith Matters Advisory Board. Why? And kind of like this perception, this reputation. And at one point, I was seriously considering stepping away and thinking, well, I'm not the best fit, because I sometimes feel like the odd man out a little bit. But as I prayed about it, I just felt this confirmation of, no, don't step away, stay involved. So both my experiences spiritually and my experiences of really wonderful, warm fellowship with many people there, I'm still involved. And I'm not speaking in behalf of Faith Matters. I am on the advisory board, but I thought it'd be fun to share some of my experiences.
Awesome. And so for those of you who don't know, I made a video kind of raising some concerns that I had about some of the content that Faith Matters is putting out. Faith Matters, how would you describe the organization to someone who hadn't heard of it before?
This is a group of Latter-day Saints who love the church and are seeking to minister to those who have questions and concerns. Everyone I know who's involved at Faith Matters really does have a lot of affection and desire for the church to grow and to continue to fulfill its mission. And, you know, they've got a podcast, they've got a magazine, Wayfair Magazine, published. Those are probably the two primary outlets.
I didn't realize Wayfair was connected with them. Wayfair Magazine is their publication. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Zach Davis. So I there's a lot I want to talk about, but that's the basics. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. And then I want to show real quick, just on the screen. This also, so they have this advisors on their kind of about page, and they have a bunch of different people here that are very much, a lot of them academics. Fiona Givens, you have Melissa Inouye. She's very connected with BYU, I believe, in I don't know, she's associated with the Maxwell Institute. You have Patrick Mason, who's the head of the isn't it the Mormon History Association, or he was at one time, if I believe right. Anyway, you have there you are on the advisory board. Rosalind Welch, she's associated with the BYU Maxwell Institute. Is that correct?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with all the details of people's backgrounds.
But regardless, you would say that it's very much, there's a lot of academics that are involved in it, people that are involved in the academy, and so I've gotten the impression, especially with Patrick Mason playing I feel like he plays a pretty big role there as far as kind of a key advisor, that they bring sort of an LDS academic approach to some of this. That's at least the impression that I get.
Yeah,
would that be a fair characterization?
Yeah.
Very cool. So anyway, in my video that I made, I leveled basically critiques of things that I saw in those videos, and we could go through some of those and talk about them specifically, or would you rather? Are there some other things that you want to bring up about your take on just kind of a general critique that I brought, and I don't know, give me feedback on what your thoughts are?
I think let's go down. We could go down the list of some context that I think could have been lost in your video. Okay. A good place to start, though, might be, one of the things President Nelson said in his talk was, if there's anything virtuous, lovely, or of good report, praiseworthy that we can say about another person, whether to his face or behind his back, that should be our standard of communication. Maybe we could start there, because obviously you can't fit. We both raised concerns about Julie Hanks in various ways. You can't always fit positives alongside the questions. So it might be nice if I could share what I have appreciated about Faith Matters, a couple of things.
Okay.
And then we could go to essentially the questions you're raising. And I think they're legitimate questions. And I appreciated that Bill Turnbull joined us last week for a conversation, and he's reiterated several times that he does believe in listening strongly to critics. Your best critic can be a real ally, and I think you're a good critic. I think I've encouraged them to listen and really hear concerns that people have.
Yeah.
So maybe we could start at some things that I think they are deserving some praise on, if we can.
Okay.
The first thing is, I just have a short list. I wrote an article during the pandemic called "Holding Questions Humbly," because as I know, you've seen the same thing. There's a big difference between somebody that has a question, say about the prophetic encouragement to get the vaccine, the urging, right?
Mm-hmm.
Big difference between holding a question about that with humility versus President Nelson is now in line with the UN and Bill Gates, like he's a fallen prophet because he's asked me to do something I'm not comfortable with. They're not even in the same spiritual, energetic ballpark in my mind. Many disciples I know have significant, sincere questions, whether that's my good wife has questions about polygamy, right? But if we hold them humbly, my experience is they can work in us and we can draw closer to the Lord in the process. So I would say everyone I know at Faith Matters and have spent a lot of time with is seeking to do this. Do they have questions about the proclamation? Yes, many of them do. But compared to some of what we see online, every one of them is kind of seeking to hold them humbly in a way where we're petitioning the Lord. We're not seeking to raise a hand against the brethren.
But can I make a quick comment on this?
Please.
About the holding questions humbly?
Yeah.
Because what if there's already been a clear answer given to the question? Like, at what point do you keep asking the question? It's like, I have children. My children come up to me and they, ask me for something, and I give them a clear answer. No, you can't do this because of X. And they come back to me and they ask again. And they ask again. And they ask again. At what point does that change from I have a question to I want to agitate against you to get you to bend the knee to this question that you've already answered? And if we just keep asking the question, and that's where I wonder if at some point you have to accept the answers that are given. And with some things like the nature of homosexual behavior, like, that's not a question. It's the answer's been given. It's been given by every prophet since, in all dispensations, the witness is pretty much there. And so it's sort of like at some point, like, you accept the answers are given and you don't keep questioning. But I understand if someone comes from sort of this critical lens that especially is prominent in academia, where it's all about deconstruction, you end up in a situation that's like, just keep asking the question, keep problematizing everything. And that's the word that, the critical theorists use, is to problematize.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a fantastic question to ask about questions. And I'm sympathetic to that. So what I would say is, especially on the really significant questions, my experience of God is that he's patient with us in arriving at where he is. And it seems to me, when I say there are disciples, that I experience my friends at Faith Matters as disciples, what I mean is they're reaching for the Lord. Mm-hmm. And they love the church and they're seeking to strengthen it. That's what I experience in my interactions. There are many people who hold these same questions who are not doing any of that. They're not seeking for further understanding. So that's the distinction I'm making. I don't see what you're describing is sort of like a recalcitrant, like, I'm not going to receive the answer I don't like. And holding questions can become almost an activist thing, right? Well, I've got questions. In fact, the whole CES letter thing is a good example of, like, I've got questions. He didn't have questions. Our former brother Reynolds didn't really have any honest questions. He was agitating long before he even released the CS letter, and so questions can be a device even. Well, and questions for change, right?
Well, and questions also, here's what I would say about questions. You don't put your faith in questions, you put your faith in the answers. So what we're looking for are answers to our questions. And when we get those answers, that's where we place our faith, is in answers. We place our faith in the truth. And so just asking questions and constantly being unsure and constantly this attitude that I can't help feel like kind of comes from the Faith Matters community is sort of like, you know, just it's all about like embrace the tension and the doubt and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, that's not what Jesus taught. Jesus taught, here are truths that you can actually put your faith in. Because now I'm not saying that I'm against questions, like, but the goal of a question is to find an answer, not to just sit with the question in this hazy, I don't know anything agnosticism. Like, we believe things and we place our faith in it. And we have propositions that we hold to be true. And when you rob people of that, you've robbed them of their faith. You've robbed them of anything solid to put their feet on. It's just all sort of nebulous and vague and, oh, it's nuanced. And I'm not saying there aren't things where there are legitimate questions. And I'm not saying that there aren't things that are not nuanced. I'm just saying that, especially when you're called Faith Matters, like, I would expect it to be like, let's talk about the things that actually are true and give these people who have questions answers to grab onto, instead of just, hey, it's okay to just not know anything specific. And maybe that's a mischaracterization, because I don't want to go too far and I don't want to point this at Faith Matters, but just that attitude of, oh, questions and doubts are like a good thing. They're not. Well, I mean, questions can be good, but they're only good in the sense that they can lead you to more truth.
Yeah. So I would suggest that there's multiple truths at play here. You're articulating one. And one thing I'm hearing you say is, if we're asking a question and we're not actually open to an answer, to a definitive, clear answer from God, from prophetic counsel, then what kind of a question really is it, right? Like, a genuine question needs to be open to being resolved. That's one truth. Another truth is,
and I would say some are resolved. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yes. And I believe in a God that's eager to help us understand and deepen truth. And it's true that some of my friends from other Christian faiths have said, I remember talking to my Greek Orthodox friend, and I shared that with her, and she said, no, God is a paradox. And if we truly understand God, then the nature of God is paradoxical. And so like in her perception, it was sort of arrogant to think that we could find answers, because the nature of God himself was paradoxical, right? And that's kind of what you're getting at, is like, we can convince ourselves that true enlightenment is to not know. And true enlightenment is to be uncertain. And if we're truly complex thinkers, we can't really say for sure. Those are all problematic. And those are all, I think, they're spiritually dangerous positions. And they have their own implicit challenges. But so we're in agreement about that, Jacob. And I know that we're in agreement about this other truth, namely, we walk by faith. And that means, in some cases, my good wife, for instance, she may never arrive at the resolution of her questions around polygamy, not in this life. It just may not happen, right? And my friend Tom Christofferson, I've talked hours and hours and hours with him, and I adore his heart, and he may never arrive at the cognitive resolution of some of his questions around the nuclear family and God's design between men and women in this life. He just, for whatever reason, what is he to do in this moment? What is my wife to do in this moment? I do think there is value in fostering a space. As I told my wife, I said, you can hold these questions as long as you need. There's not like a timeline to say, we got to resolve this so it doesn't, and my experience has been, as there is space, and this is the same thing I tell the people with questions about vaccination, by the way, like, if we can cultivate a space where they can hold those questions in a way that allows them to still participate in the body of Christ happily, by the way, not like this, angsty antagonist, like I'll be a part of the church to help change it. But I'm like, no, happily involved, trusting that the Lord can lead us all in our various questions. Questions from the right, questions from the left. Why doesn't the church do more about this? Why did this person say this? I'm just more and more persuaded, Jacob, that until the day when Jesus comes on the earth, his followers are going to have disagreements about health matters, about some political matters, even about sexuality, gender, and identity. And I have felt God smiling on our efforts to cultivate space where we can kind of, like as you've done with your brother, space where we can have generous, heartfelt explorations and affirming each other's goodness, even while we might have different perspectives. Does that make any sense?
So yes, so let me kind of steelman back what I think I'm hearing here, and I think it's right in the sense that I don't think that people should be like have to be kicked out of the church or should leave the church because they can't resolve polygamy or because they can't resolve the church's stance on homosexual behavior or whatever issue it is, or the vaccine or whatever. Okay. I believe that people, like, you don't have to have the right theology or the right views that you hold inside to be a Latter-day Saint, right? I do think that there are things that ultimately you do have to believe to be a Latter-day Saint. Like if you reject the restoration of the priesthood authority, like, yeah, like at some point there is a line at which you're no longer really a Latter-day Saint unless you hold certain beliefs. That's why when you get baptized, you have to affirm certain beliefs. And I think the baptismal interview is a very good standard for whether a person really does belong in the church or not based on their belief system. Yeah. Because fundamentally, if you can't affirm that God exists, or you can't affirm that this is the restored church of Jesus Christ, like you can participate, but if you're acting under a covenant, you're actually doing something wrong. If you're affirming a covenant that you don't believe in, okay, I believe that's an immoral act and a mockery. That's why we have worthiness standards for the temple. We also have worthiness standards for the sacrament. Now, we don't tend to have theological beliefs that you have to cross, and there's room for disagreement, but there's a difference between, for instance, if a Latter-day Saint thinks that there's nothing wrong with homosexual behavior, then they need to, what are they doing with that belief? Is it just a belief that they have, something that they struggle with? Yeah, I disagree with the church on this. Or are they agitating to make changes to the church? Are they agitating in some way subtly to try and change the doctrine and to try and influence others to adopt a point of view which clearly is outside the bounds of the church's teachings? And my thing is that we need clarity. We don't need consensus. That I don't need. But we need to be very clear that, I always use this example, homosexual behavior, according to the standards of the church, is seriously sinful. Okay? If you do not hold that belief, you are contrary to the beliefs that the church teaches. And if you are out trying to get people to believe that point of view, you are persuading people to reject the beliefs of the church. Okay? And I would do that same thing with racism. The church's stance is that racism is wrong. All races are equal before God in dignity and worth. And if you agitate and say that black people are inferior or begin to do that sort of stuff, you are acting outside of the bounds of what the church teaches. And one, we should be very clear about what people actually believe and what they're actually, or they should be clear. What I don't like is that people hide the ball and they won't just come out and say, yeah, I don't think that homosexual behavior is sinful. And that's why that explains why they behave the way that they do. Right? Or I believe that races are different and that God has certain races that he favors, and that's what I believe. And I'm sorry, if people hold to those sorts of viewpoints, they can do that and still be, I still want them to come to church and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like, just be honest. You have a different belief than what the church believes.
Yeah, I think all that's fair. And healthy dialogue involves both clarity and the softness. So if we're discussing making space for healthy fellowship and dialogue, I think it can include all of this. Meaning, dialogue is not some mushy middle ground where we're all centrist and nobody takes hard positions. And I've heard recently, well, we better not raise anything about the family proclamation in wards because we don't want to hurt feelings. And I don't. If anything, some of the best dialogues I have had on any of this have come with my friends at Faith Matters, in particular Patrick, Tom, Bethany, and MacArthur, who we can talk about when we get to some of the video. But I have felt, Jacob, so edified. I've probably asked Patrick Mason 45 questions, no joke, like hours and hours and hours and hours, right? And I've pressed him, like, what about this? What about this? You said this. And it's been very satisfying to hear responses and engage and grapple. And I come away feeling more confident in his heart, more trusting of Tom Christofferson's heart. And Bethany and MacArthur, like, these people have swept me off my feet in a good way. Like, and I had a similar experience in graduate school, by the way. I was in a very progressive liberal graduate program when my brother passed away from cancer. And I was surrounded with love. And was I silent with these people? No, we talked and we grappled, right? So this is what I'm talking about. I feel like there is something beautiful in cultivating dialogue the right way and fellowship the right way. You're pointing to the wrong way, meaning like questions as a device of activism, right? Mm-hmm. And kind of a mushiness where nobody's ever clear. I want to suggest that, and I think you and Faith Matters, and we can all be a part of this, where it's not wrong of you to raise questions and to scrutinize. You and I have both been attacked in similar ways. You know this. Like, how dare you raise questions and concerns about Julie Hanks? Well, public speaking invites public scrutiny. There's nothing wrong.
Can I make a quick
with raising concerns that are sincere? Go ahead.
Can I make a quick comment about that? Because First of all, this is getting into the territory where I want to make an important distinction. There's a difference between public advocacy and private ministry.
Sure.
My channel, this is one of the things that shocks people. People who actually know me personally are kind of like, your online person is so different from your like person to person. It's because I'm in a different space. Here, I'm talking about what is true. Okay. Yeah. This is the public arena where we sort out what's true from what's false. When I'm with another person, it's not about what's true and what's false. It's about that relationship. And I think there's a space that's needed for both of those. There's a space that's needed for private ministry, which is all about human to human connection. And to be honest, that's really where the real deep changes that you see in people happen. Yeah. Now, but I will say this, I have been deeply influenced by the public conversation, right? And the public conversation is where we sort out what's true and false, and it's a battlefield of ideas. Now, I have no doubt that if I sat down with Patrick Mason, I've had Patrick on my channel before. We had a good conversation. But my point is, I don't doubt these people's hearts. I don't doubt that they're good people. My issue is that in the public dialogue, I want clarity and I want distinctions being drawn between truth and falsehood. And for example, I actually just this morning was talking with a Calvinist friend of mine. And I'm going to be having this guy on my show. And him and I have totally different worldviews. Okay. Totally different in disagreements, very strong. When we have our conversations, they're excellent. And they're clear. This is our doctrine. These are our positions. He doesn't hide the ball. He says, I have confidence in my beliefs, and this is the way it is. I then lay out the counterpoints that I see. He lays out his counterpoints. And what happens is that we're comparing comparing and contrasting the different ways that we see the world with the highest level of clarity and specificity possible. Yes. And what I find in a lot of the conversations that I see online is that they're these mushy, vague, platitude conversations where where everyone hears what they want to hear, and there aren't, like, truth is manifest when distinctions are made. But then anytime you try and make distinctions and draw clear lines, you get the, oh, your border, your boundary defending, or whatever that term is, gatekeeping. And, we need to make space, and it needs to be vague. And that's, I want clarity and specificity. And I just feel like, because that's where you find something to place your faith in, where this constant problematizing of everything and questioning of everything, and, oh, well, there's nobody really knows, and it's so nuanced that there's no there's nothing to place your faith in.
Yeah.
Anyway,
again, I'm sympathetic to all this. Let me just push back on one small thing. That is, I would argue not all vagueness is equally problematic. And by that, I mean,
I would agree.
Let's say you have a sincere question and concern. I mentioned my wife, my dear wife, with polygamy, or some of my friends, and even myself. I've had questions about the vaccination, right? If you want to take care of the institution and the community, there is something loving about not coming out explicitly advancing your perspective, right? And holding it back a little bit. Like, in all the writing I've done about the pandemic, and I wrote a number of things, you won't see me coming out and saying explicitly my view. And that was really a weird experience, because I'm a writer, but it didn't feel right, Jacob. The prophet gave very clear counsel. It did not feel right to me to, I didn't want to be in that position. So what I wrote about was peacemaking and hearing each other out, and informed consent. And that felt, every time that I prayed about it, that felt like what I should be focused on. I was very vague, but it felt like the right thing to do, because in the dynamics of our community, authoritative voice had spoken, and it said, this is the way it needs to be. And I wanted to be humble with my questions. And that experience has given me a little empathy for, say, my friend Tom. And to the degree he has questions about some of the doctrine, maybe it's okay sometimes for us to not be totally explicit, right? And to kind of hold back. And it's almost like the private space where we work some of this out with the Lord in our own families. It doesn't all need to be public. I have a colleague.
I would agree with that. That's the thing. Remember, a lot of it comes down to your goal. Like, what is the goal here? Obviously, if I go out and publicly argue, like, I have doubts, for instance. Okay, everyone has doubts, has certain areas that they're not sure of. I could place all my time and effort into talking about the things that I'm doubting, that I'm not sure of, and ignore all the things that I am sure of and that I believe in, right? And that I have, and that I can make good arguments for, and all that kind of stuff. And so the question is that if we're trying to build the kingdom of God, and we're trying to increase people's confidence in the brethren as prophets, seers, and revelators, as we should, if we do believe that they are indeed worthy of that trust, then why would I go out and place my focus on issues and questions that undermine people's confidence in their reliability as prophets, seers, and revelators? Yeah. So a lot of it comes down to that. That's the reason, like you, and I agree, there are things that I kind of keep my mouth shut on, or that I'm vague about, or whatever, or that I avoid, simply because it's like, why would I focus my time and message on the few things that I still have doubts about, or I'm unsure of, or whatever, instead of focusing my efforts on the clear things that we can place our faith in, and that I want to encourage. It's kind of like, you could make the case against the Book of Mormon. I bet you could. You could probably make a compelling case to someone why the Book of Mormon is not credible. But why would you, but you know that there's an even better case as to why a person should place their faith in the Book of Mormon. So why would we spend too much of our efforts rehearsing our doubts with other doubters instead of talking about the things that we have that we can place our faith in?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. This is perfect. So I had a great conversation with Aubrey, who is one of the podcast hosts, about this. I brought some of my questions in preparation for our conversation, and out of that, I want to propose that there are two things that are different here. One of them you just described. Let's raise questions and rehearse doubts in a way that's corrosive to faith, right? And here's the other thing. Let's make space to hear questions and perspectives and concerns in a way that we are seeking to build faith. Now, on a theoretical level, I think you would agree, like, those two things wouldn't be the same, right?
They're both needed. We do need to talk about the doubts.
Well, yeah, and doing so with an intent to build faith is not the same thing as doing it with an intent to subvert and undermine faith. Everything that I've heard from Aubrey, Tim, and virtually every conversation at Faith Matter is the latter and not the former. It's, in fact, I think Bill would be okay with me sharing this. This has come up at retreats, and Bill has said, number one, I'm not interested in building a movement or a social cause, right? His interest is this kingdom we're a part of. And I have not heard, I don't know that I've heard a more powerful witness of President Nelson than I heard from Bill Turnbull at one of these retreats. It was discussing, like, how to strengthen and support faith. And he paused and said, I just want you to know, and he shared this tender experience where the Spirit bore witness to him of the prophetic mantle of President Nelson, and the room was completely still, right? So what I want, one thing I want to make really clear is the heart of what I've heard from my friends at Faith Matters is that latter. They desire to build faith in the church, in the brethren, in the Lord. Now, are they doing it? How effective are they doing that? I would suggest that that's also a question we might have different perspectives on. How do we help those on the margins, right? I don't know that anybody has that figured out. They're doing their version of it. And I think you have done your own, ministry. I think we need to have robust, vibrant, generous conversation about that question. That question, like, how is somebody whose faith has been shaken in some way, how is that restored, rehabilitated, reclaimed? What kind of a space I'm gonna help that happen?
I'm gonna push back on something that I think is just a presupposition that people bring to this conversation that I think is a bad framing of the entire issue.
Okay.
And that is that there are these people on the margins, right? There's a presupposition in that these people are on the margins because of the church, or that they're on the margins because of the because they don't, quote unquote, fit. That people is sin. The only marginalization that we care about is how do we get people to move away from sin and toward righteousness. And so framing it as marginalized versus the unmarginalized versus the way the scriptures would frame the whole thing is basically righteousness versus sin. And the question is if there are people who are living in sin and who are either embracing sinful actions or embracing untruths, how do we help those people to find the truth, right? And so, for instance, you'll say that, oh, well, women are on the margins in the church. Women are not on the margins in the church. And the church's doctrine, like the whole landscape of where the margins are, that's coming from a power ethic, a Marxist, in my opinion, power ethic that sees power in a social sense, like power in the control of the church, that, you know, women need to have priesthood office because otherwise they are being marginalized in terms of power dynamics. And I'm sorry, that's not the way you frame the question. Men and women in the church and according to the gospel of Jesus Christ have different roles to play. And the family proclamation says that men preside as equal partners with their spouse, but men have been given the priesthood offices by Christ. Christ selected 12 apostles. Like it's sort of like they've adopted the lens through which they view the church. That's a secular, and I would say even Marxist lens, neo-Marxist lens. And from that lens, they approach everything. And so they set up even language like, well, how do we minister to the people on the margins? Jesus ministered to the people who were living in sin and encouraged them to repent. And I always like to use there's a line someone says, yes, Jesus went and hung out among sinners. But the people who changed from the interaction wasn't Jesus. It was the sinner. And it was on his terms, not on theirs.
Yes.
And so I think there is a real question. How do we help people who've embraced false ideologies? How do we help people who are engaging in sinful behavior? That's the right question to ask. But there's tons of assumptions built up in this people on the margins.
Yeah, there are, and you're shining a light on something that deserves lots more conversation. I would summarize it to say there are very different narratives making sense of why people feel like they're not belonging, why they might feel on the margins, how they arrive there, and what to do about it.
Well, but those narratives are always framed and seen through a lens. And the lens that they're bringing to the table is very clearly influenced by ideological forces within the academy.
Yeah, and I don't think most people are aware of how these assumptions are influencing us. There are so much commentaries and rhetoric now about this very thing, where it's taken for granted that this is reality. That I think a lot of people download narratives without realizing it, just like we do on our computers. You download a certain sort of virus and it just kind of plays out into everything. And I do think, if I can just paraphrase a teeny bit what I'm hearing from you, the idea of whether inequity or iniquity is the primary problem needs a whole lot more attention. Because I'm with you, Jacob, that my reading of these scriptures suggests that iniquity, our betrayal of God's will in many, many ways and his mind, that's the core problem facing humanity. But there is another ideology and narrative that says, no, it's unfairness.
Yep.
It's inequity. That's the core problem facing society. And if you, depending on which one you choose, and I get that they overlap too, by the way, like we would consider some unfairnesses sinful, right? Like as Doctrine and Covenants talks about. But ultimately, they're kind of jealous masters. And depending on which one you start with, iniquity leads to repentance as the solution. Inequity leads to something else, confronting power structures, struggle sessions, it does feel to me like almost a different religion, as John McWhorter has said. Yeah.
And this is so much the point here in the conversations that we're having. We need to go back a step, not even to the questions that we're dealing with in many of these issues. We need to go back through the lens through which we're even evaluating the questions at all. We need to examine the presuppositions that we bring to the table. And the problem is that that's where the actual disconnect is. Like, I would agree 100% that if homosexual behavior is morally legitimate, I am 100% in favor of what Tom Christofferson and Patrick Mason and some of the others do when they agitate, in my opinion, for change in the church, very subtly and very tactfully, but basically, but that's what I would do, right? Like the church, can you imagine the injustice and how horrible it is that our prophets have led us that astray for that long, for thousands of years, absolutely harming these people. Totally agree with them. Now, here's the thing. But let's go back to our presupposition. How do you even arrive at the conclusion of what is moral at all? And how did you arrive at the conclusion that homosexual behavior is morally legitimate if that's what you hold to? And so that's the conversation we need to have, is the meta conversation. It's the conversation about the very lens that we bring to these conversations. And I would also say on the quote unquote right, and that's why I hate the political labeling. I hate labeling conservative versus progressive. I even do it a little bit. And if I do, I'm sorry. I'm wrong to. That's the wrong lens to bring to the conversation. The lens that a Christian brings to the conversation is truth versus falsehood, right versus wrong.
Yeah. Of God,
and that's all.
Not of God.
And people on the right, they bring this to people on the right will bring their political lens to the table as well. And it's like we need to abandon these false lenses and figure out what is the lens that Jesus Christ taught us to see the world through.
Yeah. So beautiful. If I can elaborate, riff a little bit off what you're saying as we go back to President Nelson's talk, I think we have two paths forward that we could travel. The one is wide and spacious, and our culture is pushing us down this path. When we consider how to have this conversation, the wide road is the culture war crusade road, where anyone that sees things differently than you or I, Jacob, is suspect and likely an enemy, if not certainly an ideological enemy, and we are to fight them, right? I think you're pointing to something else in your words, where the place I've arrived at, it's really clear to me there are disciples on both sides of these questions who are seeking to discipline their life in accordance with Scripture and God, although they grapple over what's true about this or that. And then there are people on both sides of the questions who are not disciples, who are throwing bombs at each other, and they're not trying to follow anything outside of their own thoughts and feelings, right? A disciple is somebody that recognizes there is something outside of me with higher wisdom and who loves me, and I'm going to try to discipline my life in accordance with that. So I would hope that this could become an exciting part of being a believer and a Latter-day Saint, especially with the mandate our prophet has given us. Let's engage these important questions. There are so many of them, as brothers and sisters, as disciples. Now, that doesn't mean being naive. There are people who are not taking the questions up in good faith, and people who are just really out to corrode and tear down faith. So we need to be discerning and recognize. But as a part of that discernment, let's not mistake brothers and sisters for combatants, enemy combatants, right?
Well, I agree with that, but I would also say it's tougher than that, because all of us, because of our sinful nature, are a combination of both. Okay? Yes, I desire Christ, but I also have my own stupidities and my own things that I'm not willing to submit myself fully to him. And other people are as well. I just think that even creating the sides at all, there are no sides. There is no right and left. There is no progressive versus conservative. There is no margins per se. What there is, I think that's all bullcrap and just the wrong way to frame it. I think the way that you frame it is that truth or falsehood. And and the question is, how much truth are we willing to accept and endure? And what glory are we willing to abide? Are we really truly willing? And I'm not saying I'm in this camp, but I'm framing it in the way of how much truth am I willing to take in and believe, and if truth is what this is all about, then we need to figure out, how do we even know what is true? And then we need to apply that lens for understanding what the truth is to see what's true and what's false, either in a moral sense or in an actual physical sense, as it were, like propositionally something is true. And that's the divide. They're the sheep and the goats, the light versus dark. Like, I hate the idea that this binary, like, it just makes me puke every time I hear someone say, "Oh, that's black and white thinking." It's like Jesus engaged in very much black and white thinking. Yeah. Now that doesn't mean there isn't nuance. We have to understand what we're talking about here. There is nuance. There are gray areas, but fundamentally, something is true or something is false. And disciples of Jesus Christ seek to basically embrace the truth and reject every falsehood. And we are to be like soldiers for Christ in the fight for truth. There are no enemies in this, in the sense of other people. There are only brothers and sisters. But all of us, and we're not better than anyone else, because they're sinners. We've embraced falsehoods and things as well. But the fight, as Paul said, isn't with flesh and blood. It isn't with each other. Yeah. It's this spiritual fight between truth and falsehood.
Yeah, well said. I mean, you're channeling Solzhenitsyn. He says the divide between good and evil runs through every one of our hearts.
Yep.
And so it's a grapple inside us.
And he was drawing from Jesus Christ, is what he was drawing from, because Jesus Christ fundamentally framed the world that way.
Yes.
And that's the way we frame the world.
Which is precisely the danger of framing the world as a combat between genders, or a combat between rich or poor, or a fundamental war between black and white, heterosexual, straight. That you and I are in 100% agreement. That is a fundamental departure from the worldview, assumptions, and narrative of Christ, and frankly, all major world religions, which focuses our attention on this, like our grapple between good and evil, between truth and deception. And so I do think the Christian community, the body of Christ we're trying to cultivate, is about helping each other with that grapple, right? Mm-hmm. As a part of that, I just want to come back to President Nelson and say, this higher and holier way that he's calling us to, I would say it is calling us to another truth about how we engage in this, right?
Yes.
In that, my friend Ty Mansfield loves to quote Doctrine and Covenants, that speaking the truth in the spirit of the truth is what God wants us to do. But if we speak truth and it's not in his spirit, which is beyond all of us, like his wisdom and his ways stretch all of us. But if we're not seeking to do it in his way, it's not of God, even if we're saying the right words. That's what I feel like he's doing. He's helping us say, yeah, keep sharing truth, keep engaging, but let's do it in his way.
So here's the way I frame that, because I do think there's a truth. Again, the truth is, the principle that governs this is that we're not fighting against other people. We're fighting against ideas, ideologies, and falsehood. And here's what's wild. See, there's men, I think especially, I have felt this. We have a desire inside of us that I think is God-given to fight and to want to destroy something. and some people think, oh, well, that's somehow innately wrong. And I think it definitely is wrong when it's applied to the wrong thing. I think that you're supposed to have hatred for sin and that which harms the well-being and spiritual progression of other people, but you don't hate the people that have those ideas. Do you see the difference? Yeah. Like, you need to, like, I was listening. It was funny because I was preparing the video. I was thinking, I know I had heard hymns that had sort of militant language in them. And I forgot how militant the language is in the song that I included, which is Hope of Israel. I'm sorry. It's like, hold the sword above the foe and cutting down. And it's like, hold on here. If a person doesn't understand, they might think that we're a full-on like bloodthirsty cult. So how do you reconcile that hymn that we sing regularly with the words of Elder Nelson and our President Nelson. And I think it's actually, there is a place for us to wield a sword of truth to destroy falsehood. But now we need to be careful, though, lest someone esteem us to be their enemy. They also need to know that ultimately we're not battling against you. We love you. And it's because we love you that we want you not to be misled. It's apathy to sit there and be like, just kind of, it's all good. When it's like, no, we need to flesh these things out because ultimately people are hurt by false ideas.
Yeah, amen. And it just makes me think of sitting in General Conference and hearing from President Nelson. Do you and I think for a minute that he doesn't hate sin just as much as any of us, right? He absolutely does. I see in him and other leaders, men and women, who speak to us, kind of a good model of there is such tenderness and humility that this whole campaign to cancel Elder Holland, I think it reveals more about the campaign of this this cause of these people that say, we're more loving than you. We're going to try to cancel this humble, sweet, godly man, right? It's hard. You have to kind of do mental gymnastics to pretend like the prophets are hateful, but that's what people are doing. And so in other words, there's a phrase, being above reproach, where our delivery and our sharing is with the humility and charity and patience and generosity of a disciple of Christ. And then if people still decide to just pretend like we're all bigots and hateful and this or that, they can do that. But we haven't given them evidence for it, if that makes sense. We've tried to be above reproach, and still that's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough because people, I think disciples who speak out are always going to be seen in a darkening world as antagonists. I was just reading Nephi this morning. His brothers are like, you and Lehi were judgmental of the people in Jerusalem. They were good. You guys are being judgmental. On one level, it doesn't matter how nice we're being. People will still see it wrong. But on another level, it does, because it allows the Spirit to work in a way that it otherwise couldn't work.
Here's why I hope people find me to be a paradox. I actually see it as one of the greatest compliments they could ever give me, because it tells me that I'm doing something right. I want to push people in two directions. In the area of speaking about the truth, I want them to be bold. I want them to listen to the song, Hope of Israel, and I want them to pull out their sword and go to battle without apology for the truth. But then when it comes to the way that they treat other people, so that's ideas, remember? The battle against the ideas. Fight the fight. And that's my message to the saints. You need to get out and fight the fight for truth, but also be above reproach.
Yeah.
And not let yourself, and I'm not perfect at this, just so everybody knows. I'm a human being just like the rest of y'all, and I struggle with this as well, but I'm setting up what the ideal is. And that is that you fight for truth while loving the people you're fighting against, and never letting them forget that in the way that you treat them. You know what I mean? Like I'd be the first one to, show up to help somebody if they're in need or whatever. Like, if you're not matching your battle and righteous indignation against sin and evil and that which does terrible destruction to the people that you love, but not at the same time seeing the people that are espousing those ideas and that are propagating them as your brothers and sisters with equal fervor, it's really weird. It's this weird paradox where you're pushing in opposite directions. Let me see the camera. Like opposite directions as hard as you can. You're going as hard as you can to fight sin and evil, but at the same time pushing as hard as you can to make sure that the people know that ultimately it's not about them and that you love them as a child of God and would do anything for them.
Fair enough. Well said. With the time we have left, do you think we can go down the list of a few of the specifics of the video?
Yeah. Are there specifics that you want to bring up just so that we can?
Yes.
We can, yeah. I'll let you kind of drive this as we kind of finish up here.
Yeah. So just a short list, and I appreciate your, you do this in all your videos. If anybody wants to, if you think that I've misrepresented something, the one that felt like the most, maybe the most clear misrepresentation was Janet Erickson, and we've discussed this. I interpreted what she was describing was she was trying to describe, because they didn't have a pro-choice person in the conversation, by the way, she was trying to represent in the conversation what their perspective would be, which is not the same thing as her agreeing to it or Faith Matters agreeing to it. I think she was, there's a new documentary out about abortion dialogues that happened in Boston after a doctor was shot. And I think that was the spirit she was trying to represent, is like, here's where they're coming from, but here's...
I would, and I got more than one person who gave me feedback on that. And I just want to let everyone know, like, I believe 100% that Jeanette Erickson is pro-life and all of that. It wasn't to portray her as pro-life. I think one of the issues is that it wasn't like, oh, well, this is what they'd say. It was very much like, these are legitimate concerns. There was a granting of legitimacy to for instance, specifically, she mentioned that there's an imbalance in sexual power dynamics between men and women. And like, that's like a legitimate sort of question that we have to grapple with when it's absolutely not, or that, this is kind of a moral dilemma. Like, I didn't feel like in the interview, people can go watch the full interview. Like, I encourage you to do it. I did not get the impression that they got there in the end. Like, I agree. They got there and were like, yeah, like, abortion's wrong. But it was with these really soft gloves. And what that does when you put on your soft gloves is it creates a culture in which people think that it's a legitimate sort of question to answer. The rhetoric that we use matters. Like, I could be like, here's an example. I could say, I agree. Black and white people are equals before God. But, we really have to consider, black people cause more crime. And, it's like, you don't know, you confront it boldly in order to create a culture in which this is not even in the realm of serious conversation. And abortion on demand is one of those conversations.
So let's talk about this for a minute. This is always a critique of dialogue, by the way. Israeli-Palestinian dialogue, both sides are accused of being collaborators and caving in. Anyone that dialogues with a conservative Christian about LGBT rights, you better believe gets attacked by the activists for cozying up to the Christians. My friend Joan Blades, who does, she used to be kind of, she started MoveOn.org, and then she started Living Room Conversations. She's been condemned by the climate activists for daring to have a conversation about climate change, right? So I want to paint that anytime real dialogue happens, there are concerns that arise from both sides about, you're giving space to this despicable human being, this despicable perspective. I mean, some of my best friends are Marxist, right?
Yeah, I'm friends with people that are Marxist and that are pro-abortion advocates.
Yeah, so I want to suggest that another part of this is that we don't appreciate the full power of dialogue. There's this portrayal of dialogue as just like, all perspectives are good. Like, your perspective is equally valid to mine. This is an immature kind of early stage dialogue. All the real sustained dialogues I've been a part of, and you know this for yourself, involve grappling, where we say, look, I love you. I think this idea you are holding is dangerous for this reason. And you can get into it, right? You can actually grapple. And that's what we lose if we don't. Sometimes the early stages of dialogue do look a little kind of like, Mickey Mouse, like this is too weak sauce. But if we don't practice those early stages, we don't get to the deeper stages where we're grappling, and we're also trying to persuade each other. This idea that we're never supposed to try to persuade each other of truth.
Well, no, I'm fine with trying to persuade people, although I don't think I generally don't reserve that for private ministry. But what they were having was a public conversation about the issue of abortion. And frankly, if I was engaging with someone who is very much pro-abortion, first thing I do is I'd listen to their perspective. And then I would push back on their perspective. I would question their presuppositions that they bring to the table, and I would draw very clear lines of distinction between right and wrong on the matter. And I would do this not with the intention of convincing that person. That's not my goal here in a public dialogue. My goal is to show to my audience and the people who are watching that this particular worldview fails. And not only does it fail, but it's repugnant. Same if I had someone who was a racist on the show. I would want to talk with that person. I'd let them express their opinions. And then I would show for the audience through questioning and kind of breaking it down, the distinctions between why I have my worldview and why they have theirs. Not with the intention of convincing them, but with the intention of exposing to the audience the truth. I felt like in that conversation specifically, their goal was to create higher levels of empathy for those who are confronted with abortion. And I'm sorry, I am empathetic towards someone who ends up pregnant, but the truth is the truth. This is a morally repugnant act, and anyone who tries to morally legitimize it outside of what the church has taught is committing a grievous sin. But that wasn't the feeling of the conversation. And you have Aubrey on the conversation saying things like, well, I'm trying to, figure out my point of view on this. It's like how you've been in the church your whole life and you haven't figured out what the right view is on abortion. Like, it's very clear. Why don't we just say it?
Yeah. So there's a legitimacy to your approach. And I think you've heard that enough from me, that this sort of like contesting, drawing clear lines, that's really important. If we lose that element, what you're seeing with Aubrey, and I gained a new appreciation speaking with her, she has her approach, right? And just for sake of understanding, it's
what is the goal of her approach?
Let's make space. Let's make space for generous conversations without sort of a demand that it arrives at figuring it out. Let's show a lot of empathy. Let's hear each other out. Let's seek for truth. This is the kind of.
Well, hold on.
Hold on. Let me finish.
I want to. Go ahead.
It's a softer, even more feminine, like, attempt to seek truth and cultivate understanding. My sense is, if there's an important union of masculine and feminine in the body of Christ, I think there's space for both kinds of conversations. Yours is like very different than the kind of conversation they're facilitating. I think we can build faith in both approaches.
So I want to say that I do believe that in private ministry, I could see where that approach may have, it may be, because ultimately it's not about the truth, it's about relationship. Okay. I did not watch that conversation and come away feeling like the truth was defended and is more clear because of the end of the conversation. I don't think the goal of that conversation was the truth. I think the goal of that conversation was relationships with other people. And that is, I do not believe that public dialogue is the space for relationships. It's the space for discerning the truth. And when you muddy the truth in a public conversation like that and make it more ambiguous and less clear when it's crystal clear, I'm sorry, I have great respect for Jeanette and for the others in that podcast, but they made a tactical error in the way that they talked about the subject of abortion, because they legitimized, they muddied the waters, they made it less clear, and they made it more acceptable on a cultural level for Latter-day Saints to embrace a view that is more nuanced when it comes to abortion, when there is no nuance on the subject of abortion.
And I think it's a fair critique and a fair question to say, I would have liked to see more truth-seeking in this conversation and clear lines. As Paul says, speak the truth with love, right? It's both. You're not advocating for like, just speak the truth regardless of what it means for relationships. I mean, you have your own brother on your show. you care for your brother, you adore him, but you're grappling. So it's both. And I think the cool thing is that both things stretches everyone.
Yes,
we talk about everyone grappling. The Christian view is that we're all sinners. We all fall short. And so I think we're hitting the sweet spot if the framework stretches everyone, right? And what you're describing means, if you fall a little too far on I'm only going to speak truth no matter what relationships, I'm only going to do relationships, I don't want to bring in truth because I don't want to hurt feelings. Both sides get stretched by what we're describing.
Absolutely. And I think that what we're actually describing, going back to that Christian framing of this, is we're describing truth, and then we're trying to figure out how do we get truth into people's hearts. Okay. And those are two different things, because you can be right, but no one will care how right you are. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And so there's a question between, first of all, we have to decide what is true. And then the next question is, and the thing is, we don't even cross that bridge sometimes amongst ourselves as Latter-day Saints. So we need to get clear on what's true. Then once we know what's true, then we can begin the conversation, because you and I probably agree for the most part on what's true. The question then becomes, okay, what is the most effective way to get the truth into people's hearts? Now, I do not believe that argumentation, I believe that it has its place in public conversation, and that is a forum where you can persuade people potentially that are listening as an audience member. But I can tell you, almost never will you argue someone to believe something. People, like Jonathan Haidt's elephant analogy, is spot on. People do not care. When we are having these rational debates and dialogues over the truth in public conversations, like on my channel, these are two lawyers on the backs of the elephant talking to each other. Yeah. If we actually want to make the people move, we got to touch their elephant. But the way you touch their elephant, like both parts are necessary.
So I just want to underscore that what we're describing is strongly validated by what we've been hearing from prophetic counsel about love and law, right? Yep. And notice how the direction the church has gone with sexuality and LGBT issues, and even with race, it tends to annoy people on both sides of the political spectrum. Why? I think because it stretches them. But I do think our prophets are calling us into this space of like grappling with these two. Ty wrote an article in the Deseret News about it's easier to just run with the truth no matter what, or run with the love no matter what. But to bring them both together, like, that's the work of a disciple. You can do the others. You can do the love thing just as an activist. You can do the truth thing just as sort of an agitator. But to do the love and truth, you can't do that without a mighty change happening.
And in my opinion, it isn't about balance. It's about integration. It's about fully maximizing your righteous indignation that you have, if that's what you have, but point it at the right thing. Mm-hmm. If you're full of love and empathy, then point it at the right thing. Point it at those people, minister to them, but don't sacrifice the truth. And then on the other hand, if you're the truth guy, yes, go for the truth. And I'm obviously on that scale, but I have to remind myself, be careful. You don't ever forget that these are human beings you're dealing with here. And that is but the thing is, it's not about compromise. It's about integration. It's about pointing things in the right direction. And as you said, to go back to what the brethren are talking about, I specifically included this seeming paradox in the beginning of my recent video. And actually, I just want to play this real quick clip because it shows what seems like a paradox.
Contention never leads to inspired solutions.
Real love for the sinner may compel courageous confrontation.
Make no mistake about it, contention is evil.
Jesus went into the temple of God and overthrew the tables of the money changers. Though he loved the sinner, the Lord said that he cannot look upon sin with the least degree of allowance.
Those who foster contention are taking a page out of Satan's playbook, whether they realize it or not.
So tolerance without limit could lead to spineless permissiveness.
Yeah, very good.
The Lord drew
Oh, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
boundary lines to define acceptable limits of tolerance. Danger rises when those divine limits are disobeyed. Just as parents teach little children not to run and play in the street, the Savior taught us that we need not tolerate evil.
Jacob.
Yeah.
Well done. I mean, like, these are the kind of polarities that I think a disciple is wrestling with. Before we're out of time, can I say something about Bethany MacArthur?
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if you'd be willing to share 3 links. I've had extended conversations with Bethany MacArthur, Patrick, and Tom, and I would invite anyone that's had concerns with any of these to listen to an extended conversation. I tried to give a glimpse of sort of like what my exchange with Patrick was like, and Tom and Bethany. And what I think you will find is surprise at how much love and commitment all these people have for the gospel, for the Lord. It was just overflowing in my conversation with Bethany and MacArthur. So 2 clarifications I want to make about what they said in particular. The masculine pronoun thing, right? Where they were asked about, we didn't use pronouns in the book. That was a choice they made for the book. Whether it was a right or wrong choice, I have my questions too. I asked them in that conversation about that. I said, ever since meeting you all, I've wondered if I should use the word he. And they were very quick to say that we're not discouraging or wanting to eliminate the word he or trying to police people's words, right? So I think they made a strategic, their own choice as authors in their book, but they're not trying to be pronoun polices in the church. Their desire is to celebrate what we understand about the doctrine of Heavenly Father, and to their credit, the lines that they have tried to draw are the lines the prophets have drawn. They've said, this is what the prophets have said. This is what we're going to do. Contrast that with, the Heavenly Mother crowd on Instagram that's railing against the brethren, right? And just constantly portraying them as women hating. Bethany and MacArthur are a refreshing alternative, right? And they dearly desire that women, including their own daughters, understand the beauty of restoration teaching around gender. So that's what I want to say about them is, and if you read the link that I provide, you'll see that. You'll see, in fact, I asked MacArthur in preparation for this, her thoughts, and one thing she said is she said, hold on. It makes me sad that people haven't heard our passion and enthusiasm for good and for the gospel. So I think that's the kind of thing that's really worth appreciating. Now, when she spoke about the church not being a divine institution, I think she misspoke. And I asked her about this last night. When I asked her, what did you mean there? She said, I was trying to say just the church isn't perfect. The church isn't all the way there. And she was trying to represent the teaching that other prophets have given. Harold B. Lee once said, the church is the scaffold with which we build eternal families. And kind of helping us understand the church's role and the family's role. That was her intent in that comment. It clearly didn't come across, because I had the same questions you had, like, what? The church is not a divine institution?
Well, and I want to, just so everyone knows, I kind of feel like one side of this equation is the side that doesn't want the dialogue. I'll talk with anyone. You want space? I'll make space for you. You can come in and talk on my program to all the people that are here. But we're going to have a conversation where we're going to try and get to what the truth is. And I think, I don't know, and that's fine if people don't want to, but the reality is that, like, fine, come on, let's talk about this. I didn't feel like I was, like, even you had questions about this stuff. Like, I'm not misrepresenting, I think, anyone. At least I hope not. And if I was, then let's talk about it and let's clear the air. Let's make sure that we get it out there.
Yeah, and I come with their blessing to kind of bring this not as like a spokesperson for Faith Matters, but as a friend of Faith Matters and a friend of you. Like I see the goodness and the faith on both sides. So I come with a desire that your audience would see the intent and the heart of what Faith Matters is seeking to do, and that Faith Matters would see your intent, right? I think that's the kind of work we're being called to. So I want to thank you for giving me so much time. I love our conversations, and I hope that these different ministries will continue to reach people and build faith. And we've got a lot of work to do building this Zion.
We definitely do. Well, thanks for coming on, Jacob. It's been great as usual, and I'm sure this won't be the last time we have a conversation.
Yeah, I look forward to more, brother.
All right, take care. So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.